Izuku Midoriya is born just like a normal child, but as he grows up from the ages of 1, 2, 3, and 4, he idolizes the one and only All Might. But while growing up, he's seen as normal, simple, as if he's just some normal kid. And for the most part, that is true. Other than the fact that he's an absolute addict in terms of heroes, he's a pretty much normal kid. He's kind of teased here and there for the things he likes, the things he says. But at the end of the day, he's just a kid being a kid. But with all that said, Izuku wants to be like the one and only All Might. All Might is a massive hero, and if not just massive, he is the #1 hero. All Might is the one and only, the one that is idolized throughout the entirety of Japan, and Izuku wants to be just like him. Because at the end of the day, if he's like him, he could be the greatest hero alive. But at the very, very, very least, he wants to at least be a hero that can be idolized. Someone that could be more or less seen as a symbol of hope, a symbol of peace. And the cool part is Izuku would actually get this chance, because he would eventually learn, actually not by a doctor, but on his own, that he has some sort of transformation quirk. Because out of nowhere, when he was just a little kid, he was playing Pokemon, watching it, and he was a huge fan. But what he didn't know is that his transformation quirk would lead to a link between him and Pokemon itself. And it's not the way you think it would be. Izuku would gain this Pokemon quirk based off the fact that he is obsessed with Pokemon and would be a big fan of it, leading his transformation quirk to actually spark transformations between one of his favorite Pokemon, or his very favorite Pokemon, well, Lucario. He would link with Lucario in an odd way. Seemingly, it's kind of interesting the way it would actually work out. It seems that the connection that he has emotionally, at least in terms of excitement, linked him with his so-called Lucario. And this would be cool and all, but when he would out of nowhere transfer into a Riolu, this little dog looking like monster or kind of like a Pokemon, his mother would freak out, thinking that this is insane, actually taking a baseball bat and trying to hit him with it. But eventually he would get the words out, and his mother would realize that this is her son, and this is his quirk. She would be completely shocked. How is this even possible? I mean, normally transformation quirks and stuff like this, it would be from the very beginning when they're born. And that's nothing like his father's or her quirk. They would immediately go to, well, the doctors. And the doctor wouldn't know much about this type of quirk. All he knows is that it is a transformation quirk, giving them as much information on transformation quirks as possible, and hypothesizes himself that maybe his love for these little pocket monsters led him to be like this. Maybe it's kind of a connection with his personality. Maybe it's his love for kind of the little Pokemon that he enjoys playing games with so much. Maybe it's his connection because he watches TV and the radio waves have some sort of connection with it, and that it made it spark his quirk. He has no clue, and really all they can do is hypothesize. But at the same time, he tells her not to worry, because his quirk shouldn't be permanent. What it seems like it is literally a transformation quirk, so it's not necessarily a mutation. It's not something that is permanent, but it does have permanent effects. And she asks what he means by that, and he basically says that when he transforms, it's no longer necessarily his quirk. Yes, it is a transformation quirk, but when he embodies that other thing, there is no way to easily shift him out of it. He has to do it on command and under his own control, in which is a weird explanation. And she asks how he even knows that, and he would say that he's seen some instances of transformation quirks like that, so they can assume that it's very similar. In which, of course, Inko would ask him to think about turning back into normal, and he would think hard and really, really hard, and eventually he would change back to the little version of Izuku. Yes, this would be kind of crazy, but it did kind of fit the whole his height and stuff like that. So maybe him being a little kid makes it so that he's a smaller version of that Pokemon, in which he would bring up that a Riolu is actually the pre-evolution or the baby version of a Lucario, and that he evolves based on happiness. So it wouldn't really make sense for a Riolu just to level up based on his age, in which that is true to a certain extent. But even the doctor says that, I mean, that's how that's how it works in the game. I just had a mini stroke. Sorry about that. That's how it works in the game. So it doesn't mean that's gonna how it's going to work in real life as well. So they keep this in mind as they head back home, and Izuku begins to kind of just try to figure out what his quirk is all about. But the only issue is that when he goes to school and he begins to talk to all these people, they actually think that he's kind of a freak. It's kind of sketchy and weird, and I mean, like, come on, it's some weird ass, like, more or less transforming type of thing. Nobody's really a big fan of it. Let's just say that. Everybody kind of says that it kind of makes him creepy and it kind of makes him weird. And he was already nerdy enough, and now he could change into like this little monster. I mean, come on, that's just odd. A couple of them think it's kind of cool, but they refuse to kind of say it because, you know, Bakugo's so popular, and Bakugo's kind of drives this whole bullying fest. But even with that said, well, they kind of keep it hidden, but they think being a Pokemon is kind of sick. Everybody would love to be a Pokemon, at least the nerds. And frankly, I would be in that line as well. I mean, he wants to be a Pokemon, or other people would love to transform in a Pokemon, and they think that it's so cool that he is one, but they just won't say it. Of course, though, this would limit his happiness, and as he grows up, he would figure out that it's not age that correlates with his evolution into Lucario, it's definitely happiness, because he's not the happiest kid in the world. Yes, he is pretty excitable, but deep down inside, he's not super happy because he just doesn't have that many friends. And as they approach the end of middle school, Izuku would still feel that way. He would still only be a Riolu, in which everyone kind of makes fun of the idea that he's still this little tiny creature and it can't even really do anything. But at the same time, Izuku just hasn't tried that hard to work with his Pokemon. He knows how strong a Riolu really is. I mean, like, if you put it into perspective, a Riolu is pretty damn strong, especially in a regular world. And yes, this is a Quirk world, but even in this world, he's probably more powerful than some heroes out there. I mean, he's genuinely probably stronger than some heroes. But at the same time, he wouldn't know that because he hasn't really had the chance to work out, train, increase his strength. But after a while, and after sitting through this little bit of a lecture from his middle school teacher, he would hear the idea that he's going to UA, and so is Bakugo. Bakugo would get so mad and basically slam his hand with an explosion on his desk, telling him to not even give it a shot, that he's just going to lose, he's going to die and get hurt. At the end of the day, that's what's going to happen, and he's just useless anyways. In which Izuku would learn to just ignore this, at least to a certain extent. But he would tell Bakugo that he's still going to give it a try, and that if he's not afraid of Izuku stealing his spotlight, then who cares, right? That if he thinks that Izuku's that useless, then he'll just go crash and burn anyways in the entrance exam. In which Bakugo kind of tells him to shut his mouth and eventually would sit down. The teacher would tell them to stop basically bickering with each other and tell them to get along, because eventually they're going to be heroes alongside each other, and some of them will be citizens alongside the heroes. But after some minor just explaining and stuff like that, Izuku would eventually be allowed to go home. But when he's allowed to go home, he would be stopped relatively quickly by Bakugo, who's actually straight up ready to kind of throw his journal off the roof, and also tells him to basically kill himself, which is absolutely horrible thing to say, and tells Izuku that, well, he'd be better off just jumping off the building and hoping that he gets a quirk and a better one in his next life. Izuku would just ignore him, as he'd be very frustrated, and he would just leave. And of course, he would go and retrieve his notebook that is all messed up. But of course, he can't really do much about it. So he just takes the notebook, tries to dry it off, and just heads home. When he's heading home, though, he goes a different direction, thinking that he should just work on some of his notes and work on some ideas. And he begins to continue researching and kind of writing down different things that a Lucario can do, but also what a Riolu can do, what moves and what things like that. And he does bring up the fact that Riolu is kind of like a spiritual fighting type Pokemon. Yes, he's not part psychic type, but some of his attacks, like Aura Sphere and stuff like that, deal with something that is known as Ki, or at least some inner power within somebody. So it is something that he's thought about himself, and maybe he can utilize that inner power that is dormant within him. But I mean, he's got no chance to even try that. His training, or his quote-unquote training that he does, isn't really pushing himself to the limit, and frankly can't really do much about that because he's not going to throw himself into harm's way for no reason. But what he doesn't know is that a situation is about to happen to him now. Walking under a bridge, eventually he'd hear the rumblings of something underneath, and right when he hears it, he immediately would turn around, and those rumblings would turn into a absolute crazed villain, the sludge villain, bursting out of a manhole cover, charging at Izuku, telling him that he needs his body. Izuku would panic, transforming into his Riolu form as he tries to run away. And he's obviously a good bit faster than the sludge villain, but he's scared. He thinks the sludge villain is going to catch up to him. And the sludge villain even remarks that that's a cool quirk. He could even disguise himself if he utilizes the quirk that All Might will never know. And as he says this, Izuku begins thinking, All Might, what would All Might do? He would turn, standing his ground in his small Riolu form, and he would clench his fist as hard as possible as he throws a right hand. But as he does, it looks like this orb and this aura begin to just spark off of him as he immediately uses an Aura Sphere, and it absolutely blasts the sludge villain into the roof and slams him everywhere, scattering him to little tiny pieces. All Might would then follow up and come out of the manhole cover, and Izuku would see him, and he would be extremely happy, thinking that this is awesome. As All Might approaches him, he asks him if he did this, and Izuku would change back into his normal form, in which All Might says that's a hell of a quirk he has there. That's pretty interesting. He's never thought of anything like that. Like, that's absolutely amazing. If he has a quirk like that, he'll become an extremely powerful hero. And if he's able to destroy the sludge villain as easily as he did, I mean, he's probably stronger than some heroes now. In which, hearing this from All Might, Izuku would begin glowing, in which All Might would be confused as he changes back into his Riolu form, but eventually that glow would then cover him entirely, lighting up the entirety of the underneath of the bridge. And as it lights it all up, Izuku would appear once again as a seemingly taller version of the Riolu. And obviously Izuku knows that Lucario is a steel fighting type, so this is pretty insane, making it so that his durability is quite a bit more, but at the same time, the steel typing might actually give him crazy new moves. He begins to think about this, and he begins to write in his journal super quick, and then he thinks, wait, this is the first time he's ever been extremely happy, and he finally evolved. So his hypothesis, his idea is correct. The idea that his happiness makes him evolve, he was right. All Might stands there and grabs his book as he signs it, and he says that it looks like the kid has transcended his powers already. It's really impressive. In such a short amount of time, it seems, he's already so much stronger. He can just tell by the way he holds himself. He can tell by the way this monster is, or this Pokemon, but he doesn't know it's a Pokemon. He can tell that it must be powerful. In which Izuku thanks him and says yes, he thinks that All Might has helped him with a breakthrough, in which All Might says that he's glad that he was able to help even though he doesn't necessarily know what he did. But with all that said, All Might says that he hopes to see him at UA High School, and that he's considering actually taking on a bit of a student. Maybe he can train Izuku in the 10-month span to actually going to UA. Izuku thinks this is a fantastic idea. He hasn't had proper training, so this will definitely put him in a position to utilize that training. All Might gives him a thumbs up and jumps off with the sludge villain after they clean everything up, and he tells the kid to meet him at Dagobah Beach. After some time would pass, Izuku would do just that, obviously telling his mother what happened and how the Riolu evolved, or how he evolved? Something like that, in which he shows her that it's a Lucario, and she compliments that the Lucario is so tall, that it's actually insane, and she can tell that he's extremely powerful. In which Izuku agrees as he picks up the couch with relative ease, literally with one hand. She actually wonders that maybe he can actually transform into other Pokemon as well, and Izuku thinks that this could be true, but he wonders how he's supposed to do that, in which she says that everything that they've heard is all based on emotion, or maybe it's based off of his love for a certain Pokemon, or maybe it's just the connection or the similarities he has with a Riolu, in which he thinks to himself that this is pretty interesting ideas, but of course he doesn't really know at this moment, so he's not going to like try to force himself into trying to become Arceus or anything like that. Probably kill him somehow, or maybe it'll backfire and he'll never be able to use his Lucario form ever again. He has no clue, but he tells his mother that this is a good idea to kind of read up on and try things out when it's in a safe environment. And of course, she thinks that's a great idea too. She likes how safe he's trying to be, and also how calculated he is, in which he's always been that way, but now it's even showing through even more. With all that said though, he says that he needs to go meet the one and only All Might at Dagobah Beach because he's actually going to get training from him, in which that sounds great to Izuku's mom, or Inko, and he would eventually arrive. When he arrives, he sees All Might in his All Might form, but then eventually it would deplete. All Might tells him that what he saw in him is something that he saw, or that he's only seen in himself a long time ago, or at least according to his former master. And yes, this is All Might still. He explains to him that unfortunately his power is just not what it used to be. It's a slightly depleted, but he doesn't bring up anything else. He doesn't bring up that he was like severely injured or that he can pass on the Quirk. He just wants to see what the kid is made of, especially during this time of training, in which this is a great idea. Izuku thinks that this is a pretty fair assessment of what's going on, and that he wants to see what he's capable of. So he tells Izuku, transform back into Lucario, or his other form, and start cleaning up the beach. There's a ton of heavy stuff, so maybe he should go clean it up and just try to more or less get a workout out of it. So Izuku does just that, in which it actually ups his attack stat and also his speed stat depending on how he utilizes his muscles. This is a form of more or less EV training. If he focuses on how fast he's running and how fast he can get to certain places, it ups his chances of basically having EVs leaning towards speed. And with the whole strength thing, his attack power, he gets it based off of just flat out the more or less the raw strength of having to pick up a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of refrigerators and stuff like that. Over the course of the next couple weeks, he would easily clean up the beach, and it was more beautiful than anybody could possibly imagine. He would continue running sprints up and down the beach, and even going for swims, thinking that this will help with his endurance massively. And he realizes that he can kind of stay in this form for long periods of time, and it even affects his human-like form, because when he transforms back, it's like a cheat code to getting fit. Because when he transforms back completely, he has a six-pack, he's shredded, and he's actually just like absolutely in insane fitness. Of course, it's not the level of Lucario, because Lucario is a crazy monster of a being. But for a human, I mean, his strength, his endurance, his speed is so much better than anybody else's, and it's all because of the fact that he's running, jumping, training, and all of that in his Lucario form, in which after months and months and months of training, well, let's just say All Might could tell that this kid is strong, and very strong, but at the same time he's very noble. He thinks the world of All Might, but also basically believes in certain ideals and the ideals that he wants to follow in terms of making sure everyone is safe and that it matters, like every single life matters. And he truly believes these things. And All Might can tell. So All Might tells him something about 75, maybe 80% into the training sessions, that he says that his quirk is an interesting one, and he trusts Izuku to keep this a secret because this is very serious. Explaining what One for All is and explaining what his quirk is all about. He also tells Izuku that he could pass on this quirk, in which Izuku hears this and thinks that this is insane. This is amazing. And he asks him if he's considering passing it on to him, in which All Might nods his head, saying that that's definitely the case. He knows that Izuku has a powerful quirk, but for some reason there's something within Izuku that is even further, that they can't necessarily untap without, well, pushing him even further beyond what he is now, in which Izuku's kind of confused about. But All Might explains that this quirk, One for All, might help him get to the next level, a level that he can't believe. And he believes that this form of him, the Lucario form of him, durability wise and maybe other transformations, will be able to withstand One for All so easily that his body should be in a really good condition to utilize it. In which Izuku tells him that, I mean, he'll never turn down an opportunity to be like All Might, but All Might says that he doesn't want him to necessarily be like him, not a copy and clone, but he wants him to be better. He wants him to realize and utilize the brain he has, the brain that really All Might doesn't have. And he even admits it himself that Izuku is extremely smart, very tactical. So he needs to utilize that brain that basically he doesn't have and utilize it for the greater good of everyone else. It's kind of like he's a combination of All Might and someone else as well, who he doesn't really reference. He just calls the guy who he's referencing by the name of David Shield his best friend, or one of his best friends. But he also says that he also is very similar to one of Sir Night-Eye, his former sidekick, in which Izuku is shocked to hear this because he doesn't think he's really anything like Sir Night-Eye, but All Might tells him that he's more like Sir Night-Eye in the way of his tactical thinking, that he wants to think things through before he, does anything stupid, which is a great quality to have 100% of the time. He really believes that Izuku can be an amazing hero, and that's just the fact of the matter. So the decision is made that with a little bit of time left, he is going to transfer One for All to Izuku. Izuku is excited eventually until All Might says he has to eat his hair, which he thinks is kind of weird. Like, why do I have to eat your hair? And he explains that, I mean, it could either be hair or blood, but he has to somehow consume his DNA, in which Izuku still finds weird, but he eats the hair and swallows it. But for days, maybe even weeks, there is really no difference, in which All Might asks if he is 100% in it, in terms of like he really wants to be the successor, in which Izuku says yes, 100%. And he asks All Might if he's 100% okay with him being the successor, and of course All Might is. I mean, everything has to be completely and utterly just on both sides, having full willingness to do this. But for some reason, there's no sign of it even occurring, no sign of One for All at all, and no sign at all. So they continue just training, and eventually it would be time for the entrance exam, in which Izuku is extremely excited for. But at the same time, he's a little worried because he hasn't seen the appearance of One for All, but he hopes that eventually it will arrive. It just maybe will arrive in its own special way. Izuku would arrive at the entrance exam hall and more or less enter the auditorium. When he enters the auditorium, he listens to President Mike spew off about what's going to happen in terms of the written portion of the exam. And after the written portion of the exam is completely over, he then listens to President Mike explain the robots. President Mike would explain that the robots, more or less the way they work, is they are based on a point system. 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, stuff like that. And there also is a 0-point robot, and this robot obviously is worth 0 points. And he tells them all that it's best to just avoid them. He thinks that makes sense, but after it all is said and done, they all get out toward the gates and line up, in which Izuku would be right by someone that he actually saw coming in, and someone he kind of avoided at that moment when he saw her. And that would be, well, Ochako Uraraka. But he would kind of just nervously just laugh it off and kind of just say that, oh yeah, like he wishes her good luck too. He didn't fall in this scenario, but he did bump into her. And her being her friendly self did say hello. But after that is all said and done, the gates would swing open, and as they swing open, Izuku would transform, and everybody would look to their side and see this monster. But some of the people that are pretty into like gaming and just TV shows or anime would see that that's a Lucario. That's a freaking Pokemon. And they're kind of shocked to see this. How does that even make sense? How is he doing that? But he would race off through the gates, and he would be so fast, nobody would be able to keep up. He is so quick and extremely fast that he immediately is like jumping through the robots, destroying them one punch after one punch. He's absolutely obliterating the robots. Everybody watches in awe, but they realize that they need to get on board now because he might just steal all the points. So they do just that. Everybody follows suit, and Izuku continues destroying robots, eventually leading to a point that he definitely feels that he easily could pass and get on to the next point of this exam. And he feels pretty good about it. He's happy that he was able to do all this, and frankly he's happy he's having such success, and maybe he wouldn't have been able to do all this without All Might. And that's kind of the fact of the matter. All Might has really helped him a ton, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. He just knows that's the case, but he's still thinking to himself that he still hasn't been able to unlock One for All. How is All Might able to do that? Like, he doesn't understand how he's being restricted and why he's being restricted and what's even happening. But that chance to unlock One for All, to show what he's capable of, would soon come, because, well, the 0-pointers would be immediately released, and Izuku would see people running away, but one girl laying there screaming and asking for help. Underneath metal, underneath all this rubble, Izuku could see her, and he sees her in that form, his Lucario form, and he immediately makes a dash to get her out of there. He immediately would go for the rubble, smacking it all off and kind of dusting it off, and he tries to go pick her up, but as he goes to pick her up, he sees that the 0-point robot gained far more ground than he could possibly think. He thinks to himself that maybe he'd be able to get out of here if he picks her up and runs off. And there's a good chance that he could, but there's also a good chance that that foot of the 0-point robot gets there before he can get away. So he stops, and he feels this power surge all throughout his body, and it responds to a need, not a want. And immediately this power would surge through him, and this orb of some sorts would surround Izuku, and it would blast open. His appearance would change drastically. It would seem as if this aura around him would spark in a million different ways. But not just that, he looks so much different. So much different. It seems like Izuku not only has found his awakened power, but he's actually found a new form. This is Mega Lucario. He has red paws, it seems. His hair, or his hair on the back has red tips, and on top of that, the fur seems to be connected as if it's a suit of armor. On top of that, it looks like he has kind of like these face and fur tattoos that are all black, scaling all around his skin, and he looks like an absolute masterpiece. He looks like a monster. And Izuku would wind up, and he would smash his fist into the robot, obliterating the 0-point robots to pieces. Izuku Midoriya stands there and he completely is not saying a single word. He would turn back toward the girl as he would power down and he would go to his normal form. Seemingly it took a lot out of him, but he's not necessarily tired. Maybe he just need his Lucario form needs time to rest. He picks up the girl and helps her to the nurse, as well, of course, she would get medical attention. Izuku would leave as Recovery Girl would thank him, and the girl that he helped, Ochaku Araka, would thank him as well. He would wave them off and say that's the job of a hero, and if they want to be one, well, that should be second nature. He would leave as everyone watches in awe at this one guy. What did he do? Did he know he was going to do that? That power he just found, that was insane. It would blow all their minds. And some of the people that knew Pokemon knew exactly what that was, but they think that this guy, he's like a video game. Like, there's no way that he can transform into Pokemon, into literal fictional characters. But is that so far-fetched? Is that so far-fetched when, well, let's just say there's people with some weird quirks out there? Not really. Izuku Midoriya has stamped his ticket into UA, and soon that letter, that holographic message, that message from All Might himself would arrive, and he would tell him, "Congratulations, Izuku Midoriya, you are the #1 student in the entrance exam and the #1 student now in Class 1A. Welcome to UA High School." The arrival of Deku at UA. Izuku Midoriya is excited to take on whatever's challenge and whatever's to come very, very soon. When he walks through those doors, those gates, and then eventually the door of Class 1A, he sees many people. Let's just say a lot of them look at Deku and think, well, what's so special about him? He looks normal, like he doesn't have anything. He's not some weird drastic color. He's not seemingly extremely big or strong. He doesn't have edge to him. He just seems like a cinnamon roll, like a cute little cuddly bear, but if that bear was small. And of course, this isn't talked about at all, but Izuku sits down and awaits the arrival of their teacher, Shota Aizawa. Eventually he would arrive, and Aizawa would immediately throw them into the deep end, telling them all that they're going to do somewhat of a quirk assessment, because that's the best way to figure out what the heck they're even capable of doing. And that's exactly what they do. The quirk assessment would then begin after everybody would leave the classroom. The quirk assessment would involve many things, but of course, Aizawa would tell them that the #1 student in the entrance exam will step up first, and that would be Izuku Midoriya. Everybody is pretty shocked by this. I mean, he looks so ordinary. Well, he did until he transforms into a Pokemon. Yeah, a Lucario. And most of the people that kind of knew he existed, now remember who he is, and we're kind of clouded by the idea of him just being kind of normal. But at the same time, he is not normal. He is shredded, and you can't obviously see that because it's not like he's not wearing a shirt or anything like that, but he is shredded. And this guy is pretty strong even without his Lucario form. But once he's in his Lucario form, Aizawa tosses him a ball, and he would grab the ball and he would launch it. He wouldn't really even try to do anything else. He would use a Pokemon move, but it's kind of becoming second nature. These aren't final boss moves he uses now. These are moves that he knows he can inherently use all the time, especially from all the training that he's put in with All Might. He doesn't show off his, well, Mega Evolution because he's still tampering and working with it, and he doesn't want to, do anything too stupid and hurt someone or destroy landscape, so he just throws the ball. After he throws the ball, it goes pretty far, and pretty far is probably a bit of an understatement. He chucks that thing extremely far. Not infinity by any means, but 10,000 feet through the sky would be probably kind of where he throws it, or more or less a long distance, extremely long distance. And everybody's pretty impressed, and they begin saying that this is pretty fun, that they're kind of excited. I mean, seriously, like, they love doing stuff like this. In which Aizawa would hear this, and he would immediately tell them that this is no longer going to be fun and games. It was never in the first place. So they're going to take this seriously, and he's going to make them do that. And the way he does that is pretty simple. He tells them all that if they get last place, they'll be expelled, gone from UA, just like that. Snap of your fingers, and you're now in the void of uselessness. So everyone takes it very seriously. But some of the top students would obviously just destroy through this, and that would include Izuku Midoriya, but that would also include Katsuki Bakugo, his bully, and they would destroy through this, and Bakugo would actually end up being kind of around the 4th or even 5th position and not be at the very top where he believed he should be. Izuku Midoriya, though, is at the very top. The one and only Deku proves that he is the best in their class, and it's not very close. After it is all said and done, Bakugo would make a threat saying that he'll make sure to prove that he is so much better than Izuku very, very soon. He doesn't care how leveled up he is, he doesn't care how strong he's gotten. He's going to make sure that he destroys him. Aizawa would tell them to quiet down as he reveals all the scores, and would reveal that he's actually not going to expel anybody, that he was just more or less fucking with them. And he would send them all off to basically to figure out the rest of the day, and eventually the day would eventually come to an end. The day would come to an end, and they would all head home, and after the little brief visit at home, a nice sleep, and the arrival back at UA, Izuku would be looking forward to whatever's to come, and he would get a little bit of insight at what is to come from All Might himself. At the end of the day, him and All Might are on pretty close terms. Of course, All Might has no problem telling him that he's actually going to be running the training session, and that training session would be heroes versus villains. All Might would come blazing through the door, busting through, saying, "I am here," and he walked through the door like a normal person. But, of course, I mean, All Might is far from normal, and he begins to explain exactly what they're going to do. He tells them all to get on their hero outfits, but of course Izuku doesn't necessarily have one, in which that is something him and All Might talk about briefly, but Izuku says that he doesn't find a point to him having an actual hero outfit. It just, in terms of if it's not going to help him in his Lucario form, or potentially and eventually his new or another Pokemon form, then there's no point at all. And maybe one day he can have a suit of armor or something, some advanced technology that he can put over him, but right now it doesn't feel that way. In which that would be relevant, because All Might would feel that that is kind of true. No reason to waste resources on someone that doesn't necessarily need the resources. And that's just the fact of the matter. With all that said and done though, All Might sets up the teams for heroes versus villains, and the first team out for villain side of things is actually Bakugo and Tenya Ida. The heroes on the other hand are Izuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka, in which is kind of exciting. I mean, Bakugo gets his chance to go heads up with Izuku, but Izuku gets his chance to kind of show why he's far beyond what Bakugo is saying, and far beyond Bakugo in general. So when that would begin and the 5 minutes of planning would start, Izuku would explain that there's a couple things that they could do. For starters, he knows Bakugo will come after him. He's done it all his life, and he'll continue to do it for the rest of his life. And he'll come after him, and he wants to make a statement thinking that he's better than him. He tells Ochako that she should just work her way up to Tenya Ida, that he will handle Bakugo. She asks if he'll be okay handling him on his own, and Izuku smiles and says he guarantees he'll be just fine. Then the time limit would end, and All Might would tell them all to begin, and as Izuku transforms, he walks through with Ochako going a different direction, and here comes the one and only Katsuki Bakugo coming blasting down, and he begins to blast through, and he shoots an explosion at Izuku's face. Quickly though, Izuku would immediately cross his arms and get smacked with the blow, an extremely lethal one, and he would keep his arms up. Bakugo telling him that he's not going to stop the attack as he hits Izuku over and over and over again. And eventually he would hit Izuku so much that the next hit Izuku would parry it and his fist would glow as if it was basically shining with 1,000,000 suns. And Izuku would say that Bakugo was really messed up because he's only hurting himself. As Izuku counters with double the strength that Bakugo put in all of those attacks combined, hitting Bakugo in the stomach and completely knocking him out entirely. Izuku would tell him while he's laying on the ground completely out cold that the difference in power is a very large one. He would walk upstairs to find Ochako kind of struggling with Tenya Ida, but with a quick burst of speed and a quick sidekick right to the gut of Tenya Ida, they would touch the bomb and this entire event would be over. The heroes would be the victors, and All Might would say just that. The heroes have won, at least in this regard, and it's now time for them to take their rest and watch their classmates do their best as well. Izuku would do just that, watching all of his classmates finish up their heroes versus villains, but Bakugo would be completely silent. But Tenya Ida would be quite the opposite. Tenya would kind of talk to Izuku about how he was able to do the things he was able to do and how he was able to do it in general, and that he was pretty impressed in general. Pretty impressed with his capabilities and what he's able to do, and he thought it was really cool. I mean, the whole Pokemon thing and all. He's heard about Pokemon. He's not really like, a big video game type of guy or anything like that. In which Izuku says that doesn't really surprise him, but that's okay. He doesn't have to understand exactly what Izuku is to more or less enjoy and also work together at the end of the day. Whatever information he needs, he'll tell him, and he doesn't have to worry about all that. In which, of course, this would be pretty good conversation between the two of them, and after some more battles between heroes and villains, the day would then be over. The next day would be an eventful one, and that might be an understatement, because rescue training is an important part of the hero's journey. And when Aizawa tells them that, well, there's going to be rescue training at what we know as the USJ, it's kind of exciting for all of the people there and all of the students that are there. They're excited for this whole USJ trip. And when Aizawa explains that they need to be on their best behavior and to basically shut up and go to the bus after a bit of a conversation, they all leave, go to the bus, and they more or less sit there and talk about their quirks. While talking about their quirks, it's kind of just a conversation of, oh, whose quirk is better? But the main conversation is between Izuku and Todoroki. But at the end of the day, most people think that it's Izuku. Yes, it is a transformation, and there's probably downsides to it, like who wants to look like a furry monster? But even some of the people there say that furry monster's pretty cute and also really awesome. So would you really not want to be able to transform into more or less a monster that is pretty awesome, that can kick ass, and, well, is just dope in general? Like, come on, how is that a downside? In which they do talk about it for a little bit, but Izuku kind of just lets them talk as he just hangs out normally. When they would arrive back at the USJ, they're greeted by Pro Hero 13, in which Pro Hero 13 speaks to all of them, telling them all exactly what's going to happen, what's going down, and how they're going to learn from this experience. But what she doesn't know is that it's going to be a little different than just learning from this experience. This experience will be traumatic for a lot of the people there and a lot of the students that are there, because, well, an attack on the USJ would eventually occur. When they're all standing there, they're all listening to Pro Hero 13, eventually a portal would open up at the center of the USJ. This portal would shock them to the core. They would be terrified of what's going on, and villains would pour out of it. Izuku would look over there as he looks toward Aizawa, and Aizawa tells all of them to stay still, don't move an inch, and that Pro Hero 13 will protect them. Izuku watches as Aizawa dives in to more or less go fight, and all he can think about is giving him a helping hand. He needs to help Aizawa. There's no way he's gonna just let him fight on his own. It doesn't make sense, right? Izuku would look over there toward Aizawa, about to make a break for it, but quickly he would realize that the portal villain is right in front of him, and actually separating his class entirely, dunking him into the water. When he's in the water though, he would transform immediately, going into his Lucario form, questioning himself, thinking that he really wishes that he had some sort of water type that he could swim around in. But he brushes this off as he jumps out of the water toward a boat nearby. Asui would then greet him and say that she was actually going to jump in and get him, but, well, it looks like she doesn't have to do that. Izuku would bring up the fact that they need to figure something out. They need to somehow get out of here, and yeah, that's a bit of an understatement, you could say, but at the end of the day, they need to figure out something, a plan of some sorts, in which she asks if he has enough strength to jump them from here to there in one foul leap, in which he says maybe, but I mean, that's also putting people in possible jeopardy if he can't make that jump. If he can't make that jump, they may fall in and get hurt by some of the people that are kind of below them and all of these, water creature like villains. And of course, this would be brought up, and Asui would agree with this. I mean, that is true. If they're not careful, it probably won't go well. But at the same time, do they have that much of a choice? In which he begins to think, and it's something he hasn't tried really himself at all, but maybe it will work. Maybe, just maybe. He tells them that, well, you see, Pokemon have a lot of weaknesses. It have a lot of pluses, minuses, special moves, and he continues to talk about this, and immediately Moneta, who is obviously creepy as heck, would ask if he can turn into a Vaporeon, and he would look at Moneta and shake his head, saying that his brain is ridiculously fried. But with that said, he turns to Asui one last time and says that he probably can punch the water, and she's confused. Punch the water? Yeah, punch the water with a thunder punch. In which she questions if he can even do that, and he just shrugs. He says he doesn't even know if he can, but I mean, do they really have a better choice at this moment? I mean, other than the fact of him hoping and praying that he could jump far? In which she kind of shrugs at this and says that is fair, and Izuku says that he might be electrocuted after this, but hopefully his durability can hold up, and he assumes it can, in which she asks if maybe he should crank up the heat a little bit then in terms of the power that he outputs, in which he nods and actually realizes that she probably did hear about this whole kind of idea of Izuku transforming even further than what he did before, and many of the people probably know about his mega evolution now. So Izuku does just that, cranking up the heat even further, making him even stronger, turning into Mega Lucario. He jumps in, and his hand begins to kind of electrify as he punches through the water. As he punches the water though, the shockwave itself launches him back up, so luckily enough, he's not going to, die to electricity or the quick volt that he had going on. But after that was all said and done, and basically after that whole thing was done, and after he completely and utterly destroyed and probably killed some of those fish people, everybody was able to kind of leave because the electricity didn't linger. It wasn't an active current, it was just him putting a shock on it, so it stunned / incapacitated, I guess you could say, all the villains within the water. They get across, and when they arrive, they see that Aizawa has handled the mass majority of the villains, if not all of them. But that doesn't include the main villains. The main villains like Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and a giant monster, a Nomu. Izuku says that he's going to get them out of there, but Asui wonders what he's going to do. In which he says that he's going to help Aizawa that he just feels that he needs to. He grabs both of them and he races them off quickly. As he puts them down, he runs back over toward the area, and Aizawa tells him to get out of here, but he says that he'll help him and not to worry. Izuku gets in a fighting stance, ready to fight, even in Mega Lucaria form, and he asks if he can really do this, if he really can, well, you know, stand up to some of these villains. And Izuku says he can't, to trust him. And Aizawa shrugs and says that if he dies, it's a lot of paperwork, so don't die. Izuku smirks and says he won't, as Shigaraki Kurogiri begin to try and attack. They both try to attack using portals and stuff like that, trying to even section them off entirely, or trying to section off, well, Izuku from Aizawa, trying to more or less make a easy pathway to defeating both of them, but it's not that simple. And Izuku is basically able to more or less make some space, make area between him, Aizawa, and basically the villains, and it worked out pretty well. And Izuku would fend off both Kurogiri and Shigaraki, and he would be thinking that he needs to somehow capture them. He's not sure how, but if he can, that would be extremely beneficial. But as he gains the upper hand, and as he lands a crucial blow to Shigaraki, one that would hurt him extremely bad, and one that would make him question what type of power this kid has, let's just say the other Kurogiri looks to get him out of there ASAP. He feels that there is just no reason for him to still be here, especially if this kid is as strong as he is. Shigaraki would refuse, telling the Nomu to kill that kid. The Nomu would charge forward, and Izuku would land a weak punch straight to the Nomu's chest. But as he lands the punch, it seems like an aura would spark around Izuku, and it would immediately just enhance him. He would dodge a couple more punches and land the same punch once again, but this punch was slightly stronger. And the more he punches the Nomu, the stronger he continues to get, until, well, the very last punch, when his aura seems to be off the charts. His aura seems to be going absolutely crazy. Izuku has powered up 6 stages in his attack and is now absolutely swarming the Nomu. Swarming the Nomu as quick as possible with punches that even the shock absorption can't keep up with. And with even that said, the shock absorption is keeping him in the fight, at least to a certain extent. Izuku, though, would back up, as he would tell Aizawa to keep Shigaraki and Kurogiri at bay and make sure that they can't intervene in the fight and lose him the upper hand. Aizawa nods and says as long as you keep the big freak off of him, he should be right. He'll be just fine. Izuku agrees, as immediately he begins to slam his wrists together, seemingly making this weird metal sound as it spreads toward the Nomu, and the Nomu begins to scream as his tissue begins to soften. Again, the sound begins to more or less rear off over and over again, and eventually his tissue and his skin seems to be just not as absorbent, if not absorbent, or even weaker in general right now. Izuku lands a couple more punches, and the Nomu is the shell of himself, obliterating the Nomu and even sending it flying out of the USJ. All Might would eventually arrive, but All Might's job was already done for him by Izuku Midoriya. And frankly, at the end of the day, Izuku stares toward Shigaraki as Kurogiri tries to get Shigaraki away. Shigaraki would try to get away, but Izuku would look for a punch, and as he flies through the air for that punch using extreme speed, and he's going extremely fast, like so fast that, well, not many people can even see. He goes through the air as Shigaraki is falling through a portal, and he tears off Shigaraki's arm. Yes, this isn't on purpose or anything, but because he was trying to just grab him, but his arm was just lingering, and he hit his arm and it tore it off entirely. With a +6 attack boost as well, yeah, there was no way that a body part wasn't going to get obliterated if Izuku wasn't careful. Kurogiri gets out of there with Shigaraki, at least just barely, but with an arm down, Shigaraki is in panic. All he can think about is what All For One is going to do, and how he just lost part of his quirk, if you put it into perspective, 50% of his power. Now this is a dilemma they did not expect, not one bit. Izuku would be praised by many people there, even All Might himself, and All Might would tell him that they need to continue training more and more and more, and they need to get him even stronger, because it's obvious that he's on track to being one of the youngest heroes ever, and he's on track to leveling up entirely. Aizawa would say that the kid needs to learn a bit of restraint, but other than that, the kid is absolutely, well, mind-blowing. Hates to admit it, but it's the truth. In which everyone kind of is happy that everything worked out for the best, but they're all kind of scarred by this. I mean, this is pretty sketchy, pretty scary, and frankly, who wouldn't be scared about this? With that all done though, the USJ comes to an end, and everybody is just happy and sighs with relief. After the USJ though, there is a bit of a brief downtime period. The USJ would be over, everyone would be safe, but that downtime period would lead to the one and only UA Sports Festival. The UA Sports Festival is something for everyone to enjoy, to get their minds off this whole, well, USJ villain attack, and on top of that, make it so that the other kids that, didn't get absolutely attacked and swarmed by villains, they feel like they're kind of supported still, because a lot of attention is currently on Class 1A. With the USJ, with the UA Sports Festival quickly approaching, Izuku is told that he is the #1 student and will be doing a bit of a speech, you could say. Izuku, throughout the last 3 days or so, has been training and is actually excited to try out some new things. All Might has even brought up the fact that he really should try out basically using a new Pokemon, in which this would surprise Izuku, but Izuku is kind of up for it. And All Might does tell him that at the end of the day, he's already far stronger than everyone else here, so there's no point of him not trying something new, and frankly, he'll always have all of the people that want him to join their agency. They're all going to be there. There's no changing that. Izuku thinks it's a good idea, and he begins to work with a brand new Pokemon, even though this isn't the easiest thing to work with. I mean, at the end of the day, the Pokemon is based off of his traits, and it seems like he's kind of in the realm of a fighting type, maybe / normal type, but he also can mix in other types depending on what he wants. So Izuku was like, you know what, let's try something out, and he decides that he's going to utilize the form of a Combuskin. Yeah, a Combuskin. And this is the case because he went through the Torchic phase in the last 3 days, and he evolved it relatively quickly, and he's at the end stages of the Combuskin stage, but at the same time, he's still trying to get used to it. Using fire and using fighting and fire at the same time is a lot different than steel and fighting. Steel and fighting in a way go hand in hand, but fire is such a potent thing that even Izuku is struggling with this, especially when he's not technically in the final stages of evolution and he can't utilize one for all. So that firepower could be even more insane. Eventually Izuku would arrive at the UA Sports Festival and he would begin his speech, talking to everyone, saying that he's going to absolutely do his best and everyone else will as well, and that this is going to be entertainment, that everyone is going to extremely enjoy what's going to happen, and everyone's going to love what they're going to put on. And that would definitely be the case. Izuku would watch as everyone cheers him on, and as Midnight would spin the wheel, and they would find out exactly what is to come. Because the very first event is an obstacle course race. And that obstacle course race will be against every single person or every single first year in UA. But that's is for the next part of What If Deku Had a Pokemon Quirk. The UA Sports Festival is finally going to begin. It all starts with a bit of an obstacle course race. It starts with a large corridor and Izuku goes sprinting through it, and his small frame, being that he is a combuskin, actually benefits him quite a bit. He would run through the corridor, dodging and weaving through the people there, and he would easily scale through. On top of that, he would easily get by the robots. I mean, for one, he's extremely powerful, so he would actually trip up some of the robots as he runs through, but more specifically, he's able to kind of cut the legs out from underneath some of the bigger robots and slow them down entirely. It would actually disrupt some of the people also behind him, so he's able to race on through. The crowd would continue to cheer, continue to roar, as Izuku would sprint through all of the obstacles, and this was kind of a perfect thing for him specifically. An obstacle course race is probably the easiest thing for him to do because of how much strength and power he really has. At the end of the day, it's like balance, control, strength, speed. He has all of that. And when he's even running across the ropes and stuff like that, he easily can run across those ropes as well. When you get to the landmine field though, I mean, it's even easier for him to do stuff like that because he's so fleet-footed that he just gets by all of what he needs to get by in a matter of seconds. And it leaves just this trail of explosions directly behind him. Everybody cheers him on because, I mean, cool guys don't look at explosions, and it looked pretty damn cool while he was running through. With all that said, he would finish number 1, but number 1 would have a massive drawback, because once everyone is finished and everyone is in position now, it is said that the number 1 person, or the person who obviously won the obstacle course race, has a big downside, and that is having the most points. Yes, this might seem like an upside, but it's actually a downside because he's a guaranteed win, having 10 million points. And if he, has 10 million points at the very end of it, of course he gets number 1 in this next event. But at the same time, having 10 million points puts a massive target on your back. Izuku wouldn't really be that bothered by this because he's extremely fast. So at the end of the day, when people try to take his band, he could easily get away. And this is actually a good time for him to try something out. And, he wants to try out something that he knows is kind of a cheese tactic, you could call it, or kind of like an annoying tactic in regular Pokemon. But before the game even starts, he begins, or like right before it, he gets it and he gets his team. He starts to use double team, and as he does this, it creates multiple versions of himself, yes, being that a lot of them are like mirages, but he uses so much so that there is a ton of what looks like him and his team everywhere. But at the end of the day, not many people know what the hell or where he even is, and who's the real version. And due to all of the kind of chaos and everything going on, it kind of scares everyone away. I mean, like, why would you want to be directly in front of a bunch of clones of someone that you have no idea what his strength, his weaknesses, how powerful he is? Yeah, they kind of just straight up avoid him. Even Bakugo, to an extent, of course he wants to fight Izuku, but he even knows himself that's probably not the best idea, especially with last time he got his ass beat, so maybe he just stays away from him and just makes sure he can guarantee on to the next round, and which at the end of the day would be the smarter choice, and there would be no shame in making the smarter choice. So that's what everyone kind of does. Avoid Izuku at all costs and hope that they can somehow sneak a win on him in the 1 versus 1 rounds. The cavalry battle would end, and Izuku's team, built up of Ochaku Uraka, Tokiyami, and also Meihatsume, would be an easy win for them. Very easy, in fact, to the point that it's pretty simple for them to win, as I said before. Izuku would find himself in the very next round, and it was pretty obvious that he would win. But the one he would be going against is by the name of Hitoshi Shinso. Shinso was someone that isn't like many others. He isn't as powerful. He isn't as lucky as many of the other people that are currently there, and he makes this very apparent while he's fighting Izuku. But Izuku himself actually gets caught in his kind of mind control quirk. But as he does, it seems like he begins to tap into the realms of One For All that he didn't know about in the first place. And as he does, this would force a evolution of some sorts, transforming him or evolving him into Blaziken. As he transforms or evolves into Blaziken, he would obviously feel the power of One For All surging within him as he would transform into Mega Blaziken. His power would surge throughout the entirety of the stadium, and his fiery aura would even shock many of those around. But Izuku would look toward Shinso, and he would power down himself, going into his normal human form, and he would hop off the stage. He would tell him that he has no use continuing to fight, and he might look at this as pity, but maybe if Shinso shows off even more of his power, even more of his quirk and what he can do with it throughout, facing many other people, maybe, just maybe, he'll have a chance to gain a chance to more or less go into UA's hero part of the school. Many people watching are kind of disappointed by this because they wanted to see what Izuku was even more capable of against many other people. But all the people that mattered already know what Izuku is capable of, already know what he can do, and the power that he holds within his body, and just the power he holds with his quirk. So, was this pity in a way? Yes, but at the same time, Izuku felt like this was the best choice of action for himself and also the future of Shinso.
Shinso is a good dude. He has a strong quirk.
So why not give him the opportunity, the chance to show off exactly what his quirk is capable of? And that's the chance he would eventually get, and the chance he would get for sure. But throughout this time, Izuku would get called up by All Might. All Might telling him to meet him somewhere else so that they could speak, and they would have a conversation about what's to come after the UA Sports Festival. Izuku doesn't have any crazy interest in watching the rest of the sports festival. Yes, these are his friends, but he could watch it on the TV right now as they speak. But overall, he's kind of just hanging out with All Might as they speak about All Might's former master by the name of Gran Torino. Gran Torino is kind of a master that is extremely good at teaching his students, and he helped massively in the progress of All Might, especially when he was trying to learn how to use One For All. Izuku may not need necessarily the help in controlling One For All, but any tips and tricks will definitely help. So after the conclusion of the UA Sports Festival, and after everything is said and done, and Bakugo actually winning the UA Sports Festival due to the fact that Todoroki refused to use his other side or his fire side, Izuku would find that he's actually kind of willing to go to Gran Torino's agency, even though it's not really an agency, kind of just like him in his own house, but that's beyond the point. Izuku's actually excited about this because he feels that Gran Torino might be able to show him some things that he doesn't really understand about One For All quite yet. So when that time would eventually come and he would join Gran Torino for massive amounts of training, he would learn that Gran Torino doesn't really have a ton to teach him, but he does give Izuku some training and some advice. And that advice would kind of involve his quirk. He's already been able to transcend his quirk. Obviously, he's seen that his little forms, even though he doesn't really understand them, the creatures that he uses and controls more or less have different evolutions and forms. So maybe utilizing One For All in various different ways, that's the way he should think about it. Utilizing One For All, not just in the way that he utilized it now, but maybe in various different ways as well, in which this would interest Izuku. He's not really 100% understanding what he means by this, but at the same time, this could be an interesting thought. And Gran Torino tells him to think of it like this. Think of how when you make an egg, you can decide to boil it, and you'd have a hard-boiled egg. But you could also decide to take that egg, crack it, and scramble it. Maybe even make a sunny-side-up egg. yeah, there's various different ways to make an egg, and there's various different ways to utilize one for all. So maybe that can entail in his own quirk. And this would kind of interest Izuku. There are different forms in terms of, well, Pokemon, and maybe there's even stuff that he can involve in as long as he kind of can hold that insane amount of creativity. But creativity is not the only thing he needs. Willpower, trust, training, all of it. And Gran Torino says that they'll be training for the next couple days, and then also they'll be doing a bit of patrolling. Yes, the kid is already powerful, but he needs to understand limits, controlling his power, and so on. And that's exactly what he's going to teach him. And throughout this time, Izuku does get a hold on controlling and restricting his power, because you never want him to just obliterate absolute, well, buildings and maybe even mountains for no reason. Izuku would think that this is probably a good idea, and probably for the best. So he agrees with Gran Torino, and they train throughout this time, and eventually they would begin patrolling at Hosu City. Hosu City is a pretty populated place, especially for villains. Lots of villains are in and out of this place a lot of the time, so it's kind of a good spot for a bit of patrolling. Maybe you can find some lower grade villains, people that aren't that strong, and so on. But Izuku wouldn't realize that while they're on their way there, they would come across far more than low grade villains. They would come across Nomus. Nomus that are pretty strong, but nowhere near in strength as the USJ Nomu. But still, Izuku thinks to himself that he needs to help Gran Torino just protect everyone at all, and help him protect everyone as much as possible. Gran Torino this time around would actually agree to this, as Izuku would transform into his Lucario form, in which Gran Torino would question why not the other form, but Izuku would explain that he still doesn't have massive control over that form, and being that the other form uses a lot of fire type moves, he doesn't want to burn unnecessary buildings or just do extra damage when he doesn't have to. Gran Torino would smirk slightly, thinking that the lessons that he's been instilling in the kid are already paying off, and they begin to try and protect the people not only on the train that they were riding to Hosu City, but also going through every single city or every single part of the city and alleyway to kind of protect as many people as possible. Izuku zooms through, defeating Nomu after Nomu in insane fashion, and Gran Torino, let's be honest, isn't really doing that much. Not because he can't, but because he doesn't have to. Gran Torino is doing more of the saving, and Izuku is doing more of the, well, strongman work, kind of being that All Might type figure that, well, Gran Torino expected him to be. Izuku is running around, defeating and just absolutely demolishing every Nomu or villain that he needs to demolish, and pretty easily at that. They would watch as Izuku would defeat all of these Nomus, and eventually, well, it seems that everyone was pretty much safe. But that's not the truth. As Izuku's running around, he would eventually come across an alleyway, and this alleyway would have, well, the one and only, the hero killer, Stain. Gran Torino is not too far behind, but Stain is in the midst of about to murder Tenya Ida. Izuku jumps on the opportunity, and he immediately kicks Stain away from Tenya Ida, telling the hero killer to stop now and surrender, or he'll have to put forward lethal force, in which he shows some restraint. And the hero killer would look up as he sees Izuku, and would even look at his chest that he just kicked in, and could feel that he has a cracked stern, or a cracked like rib cage, at least partially, maybe a couple broken ribs from one kick. Izuku looks at him and is in a battle stance, and of course the hero killer is kind of weirded out by this. This is just a furry animal in front of him. I mean, what the hell is that? And seriously, this is something else, something that he wasn't really expecting by any means. Izuku tells him one last time to surrender, but the hero killer would shake his head and tell him that he's not surrendering at all. Izuku would shrug as he would use extreme speed, dashing forward super fast, landing a punch and a multiple amount of punches on the hero killer, and the hero killer is already almost completely out of it. Gran Torino would come from a rooftop, kicking him in the face and then kicking him in the stomach and then in the back of the head, knocking him out. Gran Torino tells him that unfortunately these type of villains need to be defeated by like heroes that are instated. He tells Izuku he just doesn't want him to get in trouble, but just know that he deserves all the credit in the world, they just can't give him it. Izuku says he doesn't really care. He's fine with that. He doesn't really have a problem with glory and stuff like that. He knows he'll have his time sooner rather than later, and he still has a lot to learn. And Gran Torino says that he really doesn't have as much to learn as he really believes, but at the same time, everybody can learn a little something, and even Gran Torino admits that training with him and being around him has taught him more things than he could possibly imagine. The capture of the hero killer was easy, but here's the issue. Well, Tenya Ida was here for revenge, and frankly, UA needs to handle a punishment for him specifically, because this was just an idiotic premise. He was really stupid in the fact of trying to hunt down someone like the hero killer, not only by himself, but the way he did it on his own. And he's so vengeful, so unheroic, it was not something that should be taken lightly. He would get in trouble for this, and massively at that, by Aizawa, and Izuku's little internship with Gran Torino would unfortunately be shut down a little earlier than what most expected. Izuku would be kind of okay with this, but at the same time really wanted to work with Gran Torino a little bit more, but luckily maybe in the future he'll work with him again. With all that said though, Aizawa tells them that they have a final exam coming up very soon. Their final exam actually involves a written portion and a practical portion. And Aizawa would kind of explain to them exactly what the written portion would look like, but wouldn't say a word about the practical. Everybody would hear about rumors saying that, oh, well, it's actually robots again and so on and so forth. But even Izuku thinks that that's kind of dumb, because he was able to obliterate those robots within seconds. Like, this would be an easy practical if it was just robots. But, well, he kind of shrugs it off, not really thinking too much about it, because, I mean, if it is robots, well, that's going to be easy. But if it's not, then he's sure that he can adapt and figure out whatever's to come next. But after the written portion of the exam, in which Izuku continues to develop his mind and brain, and frankly, with the dormant powers of many other Pokemon within him, he actually has an accelerated learning rate. Might sound odd, but there's some Pokemon out there that are extremely intelligent. And yes, you could say there are some really dumb ones out there too, but even his main Pokemon that he uses and utilizes have an understanding of mythical forces that are pretty and inherently complex to understand. It doesn't like help him be a super genius, but Izuku is still smart on his own no matter what. With all that said, he finishes his practical exam with relative ease at that, and he goes on, or not practical, the written exam, and he goes on to the practical exam. The practical exam would be a surprise for not only him, but many of his student or his fellow students when they would arrive at the gym at UA High School, and they would see that all the teachers are waiting for them. It would be explained that all of them would take on a teacher. Yeah, a teacher. This would shock Izuku and many others, but Izuku is actually kind of excited for this, thinking that this is a pretty cool idea. And well, Izuku would kind of be brought up by Aizawa, and Aizawa would put a shoulder or a hand on his shoulder, saying that, well, you see, a good buddy Izuku here is a little different. He actually would probably beat down most of the teachers here with relative ease. So we decided to actually pass him immediately, and which Izuku actually smiles and says, oh, that's great, thank you so much, Aizawa. But Aizawa says that he still has some legwork to do though. Yes, he might have passed, but he'll be a test for some of the other students. In which Izuku actually looks at him oddly, and he would look toward Bakugo and Todoroki and tell both of them that they will be fighting Izuku. In which they would be kind of shocked by this, and well, It's because the initial plan was to put Izuku against All Might and maybe even have Bakugo on his team, but the issue with that was that Izuku has already proved to All Might himself that he can outpace All Might. So this wouldn't be that much of a challenge, and they would have to kind of change a lot. And when I mean a lot of things for it actually to matter. And of course, Bakugo would obviously say something smart and snarky, and he would say like, oh, I mean, this ain't even fair. Two versus one, him and Icy are gonna beat him down. In which Aizawa would laugh at and would actually say that he's glad that he said that because Meihatsume has actually finished something up for Izuku specifically, and it kind of works out perfectly because he thinks that, or because they think that it's such a difference that it's 2 versus 1. Aizawa would more or less throw out this giant briefcase, and Izuku would open it up. It's a suit of armor, but not a suit of armor that you would think. It's kind of like a techie version of an armor that seems to be adaptive to one's body, and Izuku thinks to himself that with the aura control of the Lucario form, he'll most likely be able to adapt this armor easily to himself. This armor seems to be really intelligent and smart. Don't get me wrong, it's very good armor, some very highly intelligent armor, and Meihatsume did wonders on it, but only Izuku is going to be able to use something like this because of the connection with aura and also the connection with kind of like a key type of energy with the Lucario. Izuku would transform, putting on the armor as it adapts to his body. It kind of puts a shield on his chest and also bracers on his arms, and it seems to kind of not fill up his entire body, but make his whole body into a lethal weapon. Now this is like a boss battle. This terrifies Bakugo and Todoroki, but they try not to show it. They try not to show that they're scared by any means, but Jesus Christ, if you have someone like that, like a monster, like a monstrous creature with kind of like alien-like armor, it feels like sometimes, right in front of you, I think it would scare you too, at least to a certain extent. But how will this battle go? How will Izuku fare against Bakugo and Todoroki? And are there any limitations to this armor? And does Aizawa have a hidden agenda? Well, you'll have to find out in part 4 of What If Deku Had a Pokemon Quirk. Izuku Midoriya is taking on Shoto Todoroki and Katsuki Bakugo. This is for the final. Aizawa was telling him that he technically already has passed, but he tells him that he could always revoke on that if he decides to do so, but he recommends he tries his best. Izuku is confused by this and asks if he wants him to go full power, like full strength, and, well, of course Aizawa waves him off, saying that he can go full strength if he wants. He probably recommends to pick and choose exactly what form he wants to be in. I mean, he assumes he wants to be in his Mega Lucario form, but, I mean, if he wants to try out his other form, he could do that as well. Izuku would kind of take this oddly, but would decide to stick with the Lucario form and would Mega Evolve as he waits within his city. As he Mega Evolves, though, an interface would come up like right in front of his vision through a lens that is on top of his head. He would see that it would say 100%, and then it would slowly go down to 10%. And Izuku would be confused. Why did it just go down to 10%? And in his eardrum, he could hear Aizawa talking. By the way, kid, you're a little too strong to take them on normally, so we toned you down just a little bit. Izuku would be confused, but then he would feel tons and tons of weight on his body, as if the weight just got amplified on the armor. Izuku would then tell Aizawa that he is a real jerk for this one. Aizawa says that his strength should be about 10% of what it normally is, but even so, that doesn't necessarily matter. The weight should bear down on him enough that he has to exert maximum effort, and slowly throughout the fight, the number will start heading back up to its normal 100%. If Izuku lasts that long, and he doesn't get beat, then he'll obviously win. He might even win at 50%, maybe 40%, but it's going to be a struggle for now. The gates would swing open and the sirens would blare, and Izuku would immediately try to run toward Bakugo and Todoroki. Izuku is thinking to himself that he needs to exert maximum effort to even fight right now, and as Bakugo and Todoroki swarm him and Todoroki shoots a giant blast of ice, Izuku would shatter the ice with one punch and utilize the armor to his advantage. He thinks that, yeah, he might not be able to throw punches at full strength, but with utilization of the armor, his attacks are a lot more sharp, and he should be able to penetrate ice relatively easily. He's able to do just that, punching through the ice, shattering it, but Bakugo would follow up with an explosion for himself, hitting Izuku right in the chest, but Izuku would grab him and wrestle him to the ground. Izuku would slam his elbow into Bakugo's jaw, and this would hurt Bakugo extremely bad. We're talking about a lot of weight being pressed down on Bakugo at the moment, and Aizawa is smiling as it's happening. Not because he wants to see Bakugo get hurt necessarily, but it's more like, wow, this kid is really adaptive in terms of what he's doing. He's using the weight of the suit and also the restrictions even to his own advantage. Izuku will see on his screen that his capacity reaches 15%, and as he does, Todoroki would come in at a blaze of glory. He would get swept on his butt as Izuku would kick him right in the face. Izuku would try his best to wrap them up in capture tape, but he's not unable to, at least not quick enough. They would both stagger up, and Bakugo would hit him with multiple explosions as it continues to heat up. And of course, Todoroki continues to fight as well, shooting flames and ice at the same time. And of course, throughout this time, Todoroki would come to terms with his fire side, but he has nowhere near the training he would have had to this point. Izuku watches as he's getting bombarded by all of this, and eventually he actually sees that Bakugo is heating up, that he's storing more and more sweat within his gauntlets, and maybe he's looking for a giant explosion. They continue to do this, and as well, Izuku braces himself one more time, a huge explosion would just unleash out of nowhere. This explosion would cover Izuku entirely, and as it covers him, Izuku would come out and he would be massively singed, not only by the fire of Todoroki, but the fire of Bakugo, or the explosions of Bakugo. He would look at them, and Izuku's little number would increase to 20%, and quickly would be increasing to 25%. And Izuku would smirk as they're confused, as he would retaliate with a massive blow to the stomach. It sends them both flying, and they're both gasping for air. Izuku seems to be that much faster, and it seems that their wild card, their trump card to defeat Izuku, did not work. Izuku would go running forward using his extreme speed, and his armor, yes, it's weighing him down, but no longer near as much as it was before. Izuku would arrive at them as he would quickly tie them both up, straight up on back to back on each other, and Izuku would raise them up, and it would be over. But here's the thing. Todoroki and Bakugo did exactly what they should have done. They worked together. Maybe they should have decided to try and escape, maybe try to invoke an escape plan. But to be honest, Izuku is a fighter that can fight from all ranges. If you put it into perspective, if they tried to run, even if they tried to encapsulate him in ice and do this or that, they probably would have gotten caught. So the best choice of action was to fight. And if you're gonna fight, you might as well work together. And in doing so, they actually did technically pass, and Izuku would be applauded by Aizawa, saying that he did even better than he thought. He was expecting 40%, maybe 35, but not 25, not even 20. Izuku kind of shrugs off the armor, saying that it's too damn hot in that thing, and Aizawa says that those restrictions will no longer be on his armor, so if he wants to use it, he definitely can. Izuku says that it's cool armor, like really cool armor, but they definitely should make it smaller, more minimal, because the heat alone kind of mess with him, and if they run into a villain that can heat him up the way they did, well, that would become an issue. But then Aizawa would bring up the fact that what if he just turned into the other guy, the fire chicken guy? As Izuku would roll his eyes, because did you just call him a fire chicken? You're definitely a weird dude. But that's beyond the point. Izuku would think to himself that that is true, that this armor was pretty good for the Lucario, but a smaller version would have been better. But if he did use his Blaziken form, or even make a Blaziken form, the fire and all of the heat wouldn't have mattered. He wouldn't have overheated because of the body of a Blaziken's adaptability to fire itself. I mean, at the end of the day, we can make jokes, but it is kind of like a fire chicken. So I mean, if a chicken's on fire and it's used to it, then what's a matter with a little bit extra fire on top of it? So Izuku does think back to what Aizawa said, and it was obvious that he was giving little hints to the idea that maybe Izuku should have been in his Blaziken form, but that's beyond the point. It really doesn't matter. With all the more or less tests done, with all the practical tests finished up, they are all done and ready to go, and Aizawa explains that everyone's going to the forest training camp, just those who didn't pass are going to be taking some extra classes. He says that he'll see them all tomorrow, and just to be ready for absolute hell. Izuku hears this, and the next day they would arrive on the bus and head off to the forest training camp. But quickly they would realize that their training is far different than any other training that anyone else could have, including Class 1B. Class 1B, they would drive right on by, but Izuku's class of Class 1A would stand on the mountain, stand from above as he looks at everyone, and they would be thrown off the mountain by the wild pussycats. As they land down there, Izuku more or less just races off as he destroys, well, monster after monster, and let's just say the restrictions that he felt with that armor are no longer felt at all. He just feels so good within it. He begins running, smashing, dashing, and using every move in his arsenal to it, and all he can think about is how he could evolve even further. How would he be able to even increase his capabilities to the maximum amount? But that's something he'll think about later on. It's not something he'll think about right now. Izuku would arrive at the forest training camp before anyone else would, and of course Aizawa would be impressed, but it wouldn't be too surprising. I mean, come on, that is what Izuku has proven he can do, and proven that he's been doing for I don't know how long of a time. But he tells him that he really should have stayed around to help his classmates out, because now his classmates are kind of left out to dry, or left out high and dry, and they might just lose. In which Izuku shrugs this off, saying that it doesn't really matter. Don't really worry about it. In which Aizawa would laugh it off a little bit, but just shake his head like, come on, man, you gotta help out your classmates just a little bit. But Izuku don't really care that much about that. They need the training anyways, and frankly, if Izuku just continues to help them throughout this entire time, it actually might end up being a detriment. In which that is something that Aizawa thought of as well. But hey, maybe he's right. Maybe he should let his class struggle just a little bit. With all that said, though, the class would eventually arrive. They would have dinner, and they would have some weird and annoying interactions. And after more time would pass, the next day would eclipse, and they would begin their training. Their training would be pretty basic. Everyone would do the same training they normally would in canon, but Izuku, on the other hand, would train with Tiger, but he would also train on his own. He would want to actually unveil his more of an arsenal, because at the end of the day, he has a fighting type that has parts steel, right? And he has a fire type that's part fighting, or obviously that's kind of the realm of it. And he believes that the more he expands, the better. So why not expand even further? And he tries to think of other things that he could use, and he begins to think that he could be maybe a Greninja. And yes, this would be kind of difficult because Greninja's a weird one in terms of it's not a fighting type. But he feels that his whole thing about, they have to be a fighting or a normal type, maybe he doesn't have to be. Maybe he could kind of just sway different directions, and maybe he could actually utilize, straight up some of the power of different Pokemon without actually needing to be in a certain category. Now, maybe this is optimistic. Maybe this is far from basically reality, but I mean, let's be honest, he's kind of bending reality for a while now, so why not give it a shot? And he actually tries. He tries to envision himself in the form of Greninja, and he does struggle quite a bit. Yes, he does start as a Froakie, and then Frogadier would be the next step, but throughout this time, he wouldn't get the best kind of training, because the struggle is pretty bad. I mean, struggling with a new Pokemon and not understanding it, he kind of even thinks to himself that he was just, imagine just like, let's just turn into a freaking Wailord at this point. Like, he knows he won't be able to do anything, but imagine just knocking people out like that. And Izuku would kind of laugh to himself about it, and he would think, what if he can? I mean, Wailords are kind of big. I mean, the stigma of being lazy as well. Maybe he could do that. Maybe he can turn into a giant whale. He thinks about it for a while, but then he kind of stays away from that. He thinks that maybe that's not the best idea in the world, so he'll hold off on that one. But hey, I mean, it might be a good idea. You never know. Izuku would continue training with everyone there, but that training, let's just say, would eventually kind of come to a halt. And as the forest would grow quiet, and as everything seemed to be okay, and everyone's eating, having a good time, growing, enjoying the company and enjoying themselves, well, villains would attack. The forest training camp is no longer a peaceful place for the heroes to grow and get stronger. No, it's a very, very hostile environment. Dabi, Toga, many others are here. And when Izuku's out to see what's going on with Koda, to give him some food, a monster, a freak of a man would arrive. He would walk over to Izuku and say that they're both going to die here and now. But Izuku would look at him, and he would realize what's happening in the forest, and he would tell Koda to back up, that he will handle him. Koda would ask him to stop, to please, like he's going to get hurt. And Izuku says that he's not the one that's going to get hurt. Trust and believe that. As he's saying that, his voice would grow deeper as he would tower, basically taller above Koda by quite a bit, as he turns into his Blaziken form. As he then eventually lifts up one of his legs, his aura would expand and fire would begin trailblazing all on his arms. And Izuku would tell the big man to take another step. And if he does, well, it's going to be the last one he takes. Of course, Muscular likes this. Oh yeah, let's have a fight. He comes swinging at Izuku, and Izuku uses one blaze kick across his jaw, putting him down and staggering him extremely bad. Izuku would follow up, as it seems like he continues to get faster. Every kick, every punch, every single time he attacks, he's getting faster and faster and faster, eventually landing crucial blows on Muscular, to the point that even when Muscular evolves and gets stronger, well, in his more muscly form, he would still get beat down senseless. His little muscles aren't anything to be compared to the fire chicken, and Izuku beats the living hell out of him. He puts him down, and then he basically kind of makeshift ties him up with anything he can. And honestly, he just creates anything he possibly can, using any Pokemon moves he can think of to also capture him entirely. He would grab Koda as he would power down so he doesn't burn Koda with his arms, and he would jump off and run at insane speeds, especially because of all of the speed boosts he's gotten from his passive ability. He would arrive back at Aizawa, and Aizawa would look at him, and he would look toward where he was. And Aizawa asks if he's fast enough to save everybody. And, well, Izuku responds with something different. He says he's fast enough to protect everybody. He takes off running as every villain there gets a boot to the face, clobbered, smashed, and obliterated. It seems like villain after villain is getting beat down. But there's a reason why they're here. The reason is Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo. They're coming after him, and Izuku wants none of it. And eventually, the choice needed to be made. Izuku was in front of the villains. Portal opening up, and Izuku could see that they're about to leave with Bakugo. Bakugo would be out of the marble. He was stuck in the marble that he just missed not too long ago. Izuku not seeing what transpired quick enough. And as Bakugo's getting dragged away, Izuku would look toward the villains and he would disappear. Everybody would be confused. But of course, well, Bakugo would still be dragged in, and all of the League of Villains, or most of them that aren't incapacitated or like captured entirely, are looking around. But guess who's in that place, that workshop, that hideout? Guess who's there with you? Izuku Midoriya. Izuku standing there in his Blaziken form, and it's as if it's a scary freaking movie. It is terrifying. He stands there in front of a one-armed Shigaraki, stands there in front of a Dabi, stands there in front of a Kurogiri that knows the capabilities of this kid. What are you? Shigaraki would look at him in complete and utter shock. And Izuku wouldn't even say a word. Would knock out Shigaraki, knock out Dabi, and knock out every single person there, and would blow the roof, literally blow the roof. This is not figuratively. He would blow the roof off of the hideout. It would basically signal heroes to go there as ASAP, and he would make sure Bakugo is good, and Bakugo says he is. Bakugo shrugs this off, but at the same time, he can't help but respect Izuku for what he's done. At the same time, he's annoyed at the fact that Izuku even had to do this. But that's fine. Izuku would tell Bakugo to take off now, and Izuku begins to focus even more than he ever had before. And he begins to transform into something he's never transformed into at all. And he goes from a Metatite to a Metacham, instantly evolving entirely, and then even Mega evolving. And everyone, or even himself, he's confused at how he's able to do it. But Izuku has so much experience now with the development and the evolution process, and with Metatite and Metacham being part of his comfort evolutions, he's able to evolve into that. Being that he is part psychic, now being a part psychic type, he immediately would use moves that would allow him to control and use telekinesis on these villains, capturing them all and capturing them in a giant bubble-like thing. He would then float off with them through the sky, but as he's leaving the building, many heroes would finally be arriving, but many villains would be as well, because there is someone stalking from above. Izuku would place the bubble down near the villains, or near the heroes, and he would look up. As he looks up, he sees a mask of a man that has been tormenting Japan and the entire world for a long, long time. All for One. All for One stares down at them, and Izuku would float up toward him, and All for One would remark that the kid is very, very talented. Very. A freak, in fact. But there is no universe that he's going to let this happen the way he believes it's going to happen. Izuku says that he begs to differ. He would kick All for One, sending him flying through multiple buildings as he would race after him, landing punch after punch after punch. And immediately the villains would be carted off, sent away as fast as possible, and Izuku would continue the fight with All for One, throwing him back toward a certain area. And as he throws him back, Izuku can see a flash, someone jumping forward, and it's All Might. All Might lands a crucial blow to All for One, hurting him extremely bad, and Izuku could smirk just a little bit. At the end of the day, he was feeling the pressure. feeling this tense aura in the air, especially with what was happening. But Izuku smiles, and he then thinks to himself that this is the end. He transforms into a whale lord as he comes barreling down on All For One, and for some reason, One For All actually makes him even bigger, taking actually another enhancement, not a mega enhancement, but a different one. It seems like he's making himself even larger, and as he makes himself even larger, the whale lord slides, the size of it slams on All For One, making him practically a pancake. Izuku would go back to a smaller form, going back to his Lucaria form, landing on the ground, and All For One's mask completely shattered, but he's still alive, just laying there completely out cold, unable to move. All For One just is basically lifeless, but still breathing to a certain extent. But All Might would look at Izuku and give him a fist bump, saying that this world, this whole place, this country, Japan itself, everything, it's all his now. That he is the protector. He is the one that's going to strike fear into every villain. He is the one that's going to make every single citizen make it feel as if there is no villains out there. He will be the symbol of peace. Izuku smirks and nods as he transforms back into his just regular form, as many police and many other people come through, pick up All For One, and take away not only All For One, but the entire League of Villains. The League of Villains have been defeated, and one giant cluster of just dangerous situations has now been ended. But there is much more, many more things, and much more danger over the horizon. What's going on with the one and only overhaul? What's going on with, the rest of Class 1A's journey? Well, you're going to have to find out in the next part of What If Deku Had a Pokemon Quirk.
Izuku Midoriya is commended for what he has done with All For One and what he did against All For One. And there are many people out there that believe that Izuku, frankly, should be a hero here and now. But, of course, we all know that's not necessarily how it works. You can't just become a hero. He's too young, and also he's very inexperienced. Even though he beat, the greatest villain or the most threatful villain ever, he still is inexperienced, at least to a certain extent. So everybody kind of conforms to the idea that maybe they just allow him and gift him a provisional hero license. And this would be pretty agreed upon pretty quickly, and this would only just skip a little bit ahead in terms of what he has to do and what he was supposed to do in the first place. Izuku would continue back to UA and would continue his normal training. And that normal training would be pretty basic overall. Izuku would work on super moves, but let's be honest, almost everything he does is a super move. And his whole thing is more or less just learning and evolving and just trying to get better with what he already could do. And that starts with, his Greninja form. That's something that he wants to do and actually get better at. And that's exactly what he's doing. He gets better at this, his Greninja form, and he continues to actually adapt with certain things. Izuku would continue this training, and eventually some people, actually known as the Big Three, would show up at their classroom. They would explain that they would tell all of them that they would be speaking about the work study and that what's going to happen and what's going on and so forth. And of course, some of them are going, or all of them except for Izuku, are going to have to go and do their provisional hero licensing exams. But for Izuku, he kind of just learns more about what's going to happen with the work study, and he's actually going to be shipped off first. But that's not before he gets a shot at Mirio. He wants to challenge Mirio, and let's just say this fight was one that was a spectacle. And Mirio goes head to head with Izuku, and Izuku's speed is what really keeps him in it by a long shot. Mirio might be unorthodox. He might be hard to hit and almost impossible to hit, but overall, well, let's just say Mirio is falling behind. Because once Izuku starts kind of realizing what's happening, and once he starts understanding what's happening, Izuku starts overtaking the kind of unorthodoxness of Mirio's skill and ability. And that's just with one of his Pokemon forms. He could switch to a completely different form, his Medicham form, and kind of just manipulate the space around Mirio and probably immediately win. But he decides to, go against that. He doesn't really want to do that necessarily. But maybe that's something he'll think about later on. Izuku, though, on the other hand, would have a good battle with him, but eventually it would be halted, and Mirio would bring up the fact that Sir Night-Eye wants to actually speak with him because, well, he knows. And that's it. It was a pretty ominous little remark, but of course, they kind of already know what's going on, and Izuku agrees to do this, and soon after, he would arrive at the work study. Sir Night-Eye's work study, he wouldn't really be challenged or tested or anything like that. He would actually be brought into the fold, and Sir Night-Eye would bring up that if he's in such graces with All Might, that there's no reason for him to test him any further. And on top of that, he helped All Might defeat one of the greatest of villains ever, and also a big villain group. Now that is something that is absolutely a spectacle, and something that everyone could be proud of and the future of heroes could look after. And of course, Sir Night-Eye thinks that Izuku is the best of all of them. Honestly, maybe all of them combined and even better. With all that said, though, Izuku kind of just takes all of this in and eventually would be brought into the fold about the one and only Overhaul. Overhaul is very, very interesting, and the reason for this is Overhaul is kind of in a weird position. Overhaul is doing these weird things and horrible things, and he's trying to more or less eliminate Quirks entirely, but there's a lot of things that they are missing in terms of the clues and in terms of just everything they need to know. In which, of course, Izuku wants to figure all of that out as well, and once they can, and once, they're available, Mirio and him begin to go on patrols, like almost immediately. And, if luck brought it upon them, it seems as if Overhaul was brought on a silver platter right in front of them, in which Mirio would try to calm the situation. But of course, Overhaul would look at the kid and would kind of question who he is exactly. He's never seen a hero like him around here, or doesn't look familiar at least. And Izuku wouldn't say much, as he has the little girl that ran out of the alleyway in his arms, and he would look back at Overhaul and say that he might recognize him from, and as he's about to say something, Mirio cuts him off, saying that Izuku was actually part of a most recent TV show documentary, and that's probably where he saw him from. Izuku would look at Mirio and would agree, and Izuku would basically put Eri on his back, and as he does, he tells Overhaul that more or less he's actually known from this documentary for his quirk. It's kind of a funny one. So if he doesn't mind, he would love to show him, and it's actually a cool little thing, and Eri would probably love it. In which he thinks, and Overhaul tries to play it off like this is fine and cool and dandy, and he kind of laughs this off, and he says, "Oh, you know what? Why not? We're not in too big of a hurry, so go right ahead." Izuku would then transform, and he would immediately transform into his Mega Medicham form, and immediately Overhaul would begin to levitate, stuck in midair, and he would refuse to allow Overhaul to move. And Izuku, in a different voice, deeper than usual, would tell Overhaul that they know exactly who he is. And that Mirio, he might have not done enough reading up necessarily on the powers that Izuku has, but Izuku says that he knows a lot about his own strength, a lot about his own powers, and he knows Overhaul is not going anywhere. Not even a single inch. Mirio would be shocked to see this, and Mirio would tell him to keep Overhaul in a good area, an area that they won't have to worry about. And Izuku says that's fine. He can't move a single body part anyways, but just in case, Izuku would float him up to the sky where he's away from all buildings as well, and he would hold him up there. Eri would be shocked to see this, but she can see that this powerful person, is beating Overhaul, is beating the person that she's so afraid of, beating the person that has made her fear for her life so much. And this would, in a way, make her happy. But at the same time, she still doesn't crack a smile on her face. But reinforcements would soon come, and Izuku would have Overhaul still floating mid-air. And eventually, when they would arrive, they would kind of scheme what they should do. And Izuku says that if they want to put a Quirk canceling cuff on him, they can. He'll hold him still throughout this entire time. In which he says they need to hurry up a little bit though, because he's been holding them for a while and he's getting tired. He laughs about this slightly as he brings them down, and they slap on Quirk canceling cuffs, and well, it's a wrap for Overhaul. He's taken away, and Overhaul argues that he did nothing wrong, that there's nothing, no proof, no nothing. And Izuku, well, he immediately says that, well, bare minimum, well, he has basically hurting his own child. Look at all of the things that are on her body. That is not just from falling. You gotta be ridiculous to think that. In which they all say that they have other stuff on Overhaul already anyways, and they know that this is Overhaul himself, notorious gang leader of the Shia Hazaikai. So yeah, they have a lot on him. There is no way around this, and there is no getting out of this through talking. Izuku would have captured Overhaul and they would have brought him in, and that entire thing would be over. Of course, they would need to siege his whole gang and siege what's going to happen next, but having no leader and having that vacancy, that siege and that kind of just run over in the building would be way easier than you could possibly imagine, because Mirio can kind of take the forefront, and so is Izuku. After all of it is said and done, after the takedown of the Shia Hazaikai and everything goes their way, well, let's just say everything seems to be good, at peace. It seems like the League of Villains were shut down. It seems like everything has come to a halt. And Izuku and everyone else can go back to being students once again. And that's a great part of everything that's going on. They're students. They are not full-time heroes by any means, and not yet. Izuku and everybody in Class 1A go on and do a Class 1A versus Class 1B, and Izuku would be happy to see that he sees Shinso there as well. Someone that he wanted to see get tested, someone that he wanted to see be a hero as well, and he's getting his chance. Shinso is getting his chance. This would make Izuku extremely happy, and this would bring a smile to his face at the end of the day. Izuku would see things kind of in a different direction. There are more things to be done, there are more villains to be captured, but the League of Villains and the Shia Hazaikai being shut down, well, it seems like they're going to be waiting for the next generation of villains. For now, Izuku watches as Class 1A versus Class 1B continues to thrash on, everybody fighting each other, and Izuku would just be spectating. Aizawa doesn't necessarily want him even interacting. It's kind of unfair, you could say. And Izuku agrees with this, but he also brings up the fact that he could also decide to be in it and not use his quirk, in which he thinks he's insane, but Izuku says that his quirk alone makes him really powerful, and his quirk actually makes his regular self extremely powerful. And Aizawa says that he can do that if he really wants to, that he'll put him on the team that he was going to be on in the first place, but at the same time, he doesn't really need to. In which Izuku, well, he wants to see what he can do with One for All without his Pokemon quirk, and that's exactly what he does. He takes on the likes of Shinso, the likes of many others, Monoma, and many more from Class 1B. But even the fight against him without his quirk seems unfair, because Izuku is super strong just as a normal human being, and his comfortability with One for All through his Pokemon kind of abilities kind of elevated to a large extent. And the reason for this is just how much he's using One for All technically in his Pokemon state. And Izuku could easily use 20, 30, 40%, especially with how strong he really is in his regular form. He would dominate, and he would easily beat the people there, obviously with a couple little struggles here and there. Nothing like too major though, and Izuku's team would clearly win, and it would be kind of like a consolation win at the end of the day, because they would already be the winners. Class 1A is better than Class 1B, and there is nothing that is going to change that. Now, what's going to happen for the rest of the heroes with the League of Villains and the Shiha Zaikai gone, dusted, and gone in the wind? Well, we don't know. Will they take on and find the hidden villain group within a city, or will that villain group still stay there and just live in peace the way they want to? Nonetheless, even if they come to the forefront, it seems as if the power that Izuku in Class 1A holds will be more than enough, and far more than enough to take on whatever is needed to take on and whatever needs to happen. But with that said, that's the end of What If Deku Had a Pokemon Quirk. And if you enjoyed it, make sure to show some love. Leave a like, leave a sub, and leave a comment down below. All that good stuff. And yeah, that's all I gotta say. With some of these overpowered quirks, I know I don't necessarily go into like war arcs and stuff, because I mean, I'm not gonna force a war arc when there doesn't have to be one and when there shouldn't be one. And I'm pretty sure some of y'all kind of acknowledge that as well, where it's like he should have beat this person then and there, and I've had conversations about that with people, that I don't necessarily force certain arcs just for the sake of forcing them, especially if someone is overpowered. If the quirk is overpowered, which I really do like doing overpowered quirks, if they are overpowered, there's no reason to force certain arcs just for the sake of forcing certain arcs. But yeah, eventually I do have some ideas in the wings that aren't as OP and will be a lot more balanced in terms of what's happening in the story and what's going on. And that will probably include war arcs and maybe other things happening to Deku, but that's something that I won't really get into right now. With that said, hope y'all enjoyed, like I said, and I hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.